All right, greetings, Mr. and Mrs. Middle America and all the ships at sea. This is Ian Punnett in for George Norrie. 2 Fridays in a row. It makes my week. Sorry, haters. And then I get to even do Saturday on top of that before we do. You know, sometimes when I say this, it seems more truer than others, but tonight I think we can all kind of feel it a little bit to the hostile invading alien armies hovering silently behind their cloaking devices just outside of Earth's atmosphere. Remember, eat the Canadians first. And why should you have Canuck L'Orange? Well, the new report is out from the Pentagon, the highly anticipated report. It's the latest. I don't know how much of this has gotten discussed already this week on Coast to Coast, but I asked for a guy that we had just had on not long ago to come back on. You might remember when we were having a discussion about Unsolved Mysteries, the current incarnation of Unsolved Mysteries, which is on Netflix right now, and they did a report, an updated report on the Michigan UFO sightings along Lake Michigan on what is the western side of Lake Michigan around Muskegon, right? The Muskegon sightings. And Bill Konkolesky came on. He's the head of Michigan MUFON. And we talked about that then not too long ago, but had to have him back to help me sort out this latest report, the Pentagon's 2022 UFO report, or UAP report, to be more accurate. It comes down to 171 cases, which is still extraordinary. I mean, when you filter out, ground radar issues or explainable phenomena, still 171 sightings, mostly from Air Force and Navy pilots, some domestic pilots, and others that cannot be explained. That's a huge number, especially from an organization that spent, 40 years going zero, right? Nope, not this year. Nope, nothing. Nope, oh, a bunch of kooks. Oh, and now, they're finally ponying up the videos, and we'll talk about that with Bill Konkolesky coming up in just a minute. Tomorrow night on Coast to Coast, first hour, we're going to revisit a subject which has gotten a little bit of play lately in the mainstream press, the royal family, but from the standpoint of Glynis McCants, who's been doing numerological forecasts of the royal family since about 2017. She did some for the Daily Mail in England, but mostly she was focused on the success of the relationships. And so far, she's been 100% in her predictions based on the numbers in the royal family. We'll talk about that. We'll get an update on that in the first hour tomorrow night. But I also just want to ask her about something which came up in an interview with Harry earlier this week, when he said that he was unconvinced. He still was very open to discussions about how his mother, Princess Diana, had been murdered. And it wasn't just a result of, like a negligent homicide kind of murder, but some sort of conspiracy. And so I'll be curious. She's been royal watching for a while, and we tried to find some experts on that, even for a longer visit. I think we'll do that later on. Sadly, some of the people that we have had on Coast to Coast over the years who have talked about this conspiracy have passed on. They died. So obviously we couldn't book them, but we tried, and it was interesting to call back and find out that people had become, either because of illness or because of age, had either passed on or were unavailable. So tomorrow night will be our first chance to talk about it in a while, and that's in the first hour. And then for the rest of the show, I'm pretty excited about this. I don't know if you've been following the story about the billionaires living forever, but the new science out there, it's very spendy, so not everybody will be able to afford it. But Bart Costco, who has been on with us before, too. He's a good coast-to-coast regular and a professor in California. He's going to talk about this longevity issue and the preservation of people beyond this earth. And I think this may go in a direction that most articles on this weren't going. But that's what we're here for, right? That's what we do. And that and open lines coming up later on tonight. We'll all get started next with Bill on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Before I go on, I want to note something. Thank you to all the people who follow me on Twitter at Deacon Punnett, DeaconPunnett. We've been having this discussion this week about all of the folks who have died, who were seemingly too young to have passed in music, right? So Lisa Marie Presley, the latest, she died at 54. Massive heart attack, apparently, and that she still lived 12 years longer than her father. Elvis Presley died at 42. Seems weird even now just to think about it. And she survived 3 years longer than her second husband, Michael Jackson, who was dead at 51. Just heard the news about Randy Bachman, and then, of course, Jeff Beck earlier in the week. So everything tonight is all Jeff Beck. All Jeff Beck and Yardbirds, Jeff Beck projects for bumpers. I happen to have been a big fan, and I, not just with the Yardbird stuff, but also on his solo work. And he was just a genius. He really was. He was just one of a kind, and it always on my bucket list of people I wish I could have met. Unfortunately, that will go unfulfilled. But tonight we'll honor him, and then tomorrow night, who knows the way this week is going. Bill Konkolesky is back again with us, the director of Michigan MUFON. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Ian.
We got into the conversation last time, and I said I was going to have you back, so I bet I didn't know it was going to be this fast, but I'm so glad you made time for us.
Right on. Happy Friday the 13th.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah, I guess it is. No, yeah. Well, it sort of crossed over here into Saturday, but I forgot it was Friday the 13th, which turned out to be a really good day for me. All right. So, Bill, last we left it, we had a conversation about the Muskegon sightings in the episode that was in Unsolved Mysteries, right? And we discussed the possibility that as a result of that particular episode that you would be hearing from, or the show would be hearing from other people that would be updating them or passing along new tapes or new testimony, people who had been sort of waiting for somebody else to break the ice on the subject. Was there any more of a PS to that episode in Unsolved Mysteries?
We have gotten some light detail sightings to follow up. A lot of Me Too in terms of,
right.
I saw the same thing that others saw that night. There was a gentleman who worked for one of the news channels in Kalamazoo, Michigan, said he had watched a display for like 15 minutes from Kalamazoo, and that he's fairly certain that the news station still has some video of it.
Oh, cool.
So I'm hoping to get a hold of that. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And,
awesome.
yeah, it's been a bump in just the visibility of the Mutual UFO Network. And, there's a lot that is constantly out there in the news, of course, as well, that always lately has been bumping up our sightings. So we've been pretty busy investigating.
Glad to hear it. Well, you've got, all of the bona fides on this subject, and you treat it as one should, with a certain amount of scientific detachment as opposed to breathless zealotry that, oh, yes, we got another one. You investigate, and you are like the Pentagon committee, it seems. MUFON has a reputation for being willing to dismiss things once they've been investigated, and you don't go chasing your tail. But I have to say, this story, this new one that came out from the Pentagon, has been a little bit of a head scratcher. So help us try to understand it for people who haven't followed it. Everybody's sort of waiting for the latest on UAPs from the Pentagon, and they gave an update to their preliminary assessment. So it's still like an addendum to the preliminary, and the annual report does give new details about some of what's been going on with the DOD. I'm looking at the article by Tim Banal, which is at coasttocoastam.com, and they talk about the DOD's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, AARO. Have you had much interface with them?
Oh, no, not directly, certainly. Okay. And, yeah, they have a very interesting name, but, I mean, I guess I get it.
Yeah.
Why they call themselves that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they received an additional 366 cases since the 2021 preliminary assessment. So they got 366 more to sort through, bringing the total number of UAP accounts collected by that office, AARO, bringing that up to 510. And I'm just going to read with how Tim assessed this. In noting the increase in reports, the office seemed to indicate that this did not necessarily mean that there were suddenly more UFOs in the skies, but that witnesses were now encouraged to share their accounts, quote, due to a concentrated effort to destigmatize the topic of UAP and instead recognize the potential risks that it poses. Breaking down their investigation into the fresh batch of reports, AARO revealed that their analysis, quote, judged more than half as exhibiting, quote, unremarkable characteristics. To that end, they explained that 26 of those sightings were drones, 163 were characterized as balloon or balloon-like entities, and 6 were simply classified as clutter, right? Sort of the radar clutter stuff. But of the remaining 171 cases, and that's a big fat number, the report said that some of the UAPs, quote, appeared to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. Although they did not say exactly how many of those incidences there were, the office noted that, quote, they require further analysis. It was a fairly dry 12-page annual assessment. And it just says basically that they're still on the case. Where are you with all that?
Okay, so whenever I see one of these reports, the first thing I think of is it's theater. They put out this report. It looks fancy, and when you're done reading it, you don't really get any details about any of the individual sightings. Even the ones that say, well, this one sounded interesting, but it turned out to be a drone. It's a bunch of numbers, and it turns into a Rorschach test in some respects, where when I was following some of the chatter on it today, some people were saying, well, they identified half of what came in, as if that was some sort of conclusive dismissal.
Right.
And then some, it's a glass half full, half empty kind of thing, I guess, there too, because a lot of people are saying, look at this. They put out this report and say that 171 of these sightings from the recent addendum of sightings, are, they don't know what they are. And then they can sort of, walk that backwards and forwards and saying, we still maybe have ways to investigate these, and that number could change and all that sort of thing. But, this report is going to be forgotten in a couple days. And then, until we get the next report, and then it'll be a bunch of other numbers. Give me something out of that 171 that you can identify. That's really going to impress me. Tell me about that. But instead, it's just, here's a number, move along, nothing to see here.
Yeah, but, okay, I remember, I don't know if I used this last time when we talked to you, but Jack Anderson, the famous columnist, was doing a series on remote viewing back in the day, and he made the point that you could take 500 psychics, put them in a room, and say that there is a file cabinet somewhere in Washington, D.C. that has a word in one drawer written on a piece of paper. Tell us what the word is. And 499 people could get it wrong. And one guy could read that piece of paper in that file cabinet in Washington, D.C. That would be significant, because that means that, okay, one person can do that. So if one person can read something that's in a locked file cabinet nowhere near where they are, then that proves actually that doesn't, the 499 who can't doesn't prove anything. It's the one person who can that proves that this is possible. So if that's true, then 171 is even much more significant. It's about half of those remaining cases. 171 cases that they won't explain, or they don't go into detail on what actually they were, with some promise that sometime later they will. But 171 is an enormous number, statistically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
I mean, that is
super
significant.
From pilots, too.
Right.
Trained observers.
That's Hall of Fame numbers. If you batted 171 out of 366, you would be a lock for Cooperstown. Right? I mean, that's an insanely high number. So that's what I'm thinking. And again, from pilots, consider the source. That's terrific. So how do you at MUFON, how do you use that then as a lens? How do you join this kind of skeptical community and explain or begin to move forward without them just going, so half of them were explained?
Okay, so in MUFON, actually, we have a much greater percentage of identification. Yeah, in our good years, we can identify up to 95% of what comes into us. And so it's kind of funny almost that they can't seem to identify more of what's coming into them if we have numbers like that. It just really seems like sloppy work. And, I never really look to the government giving the approval to believe in the UFO phenomena or, the military. It's, when you're a hands-on field investigator, you hear the witnesses, you see the cases up front, you get to know the witnesses. And even though there's only a tiny percentage that are unexplained, there's a lot of really great sightings in that small percentage that, is like what you were talking about with the file cabinets. Michigan, we get in about 200 sightings a year, but that means with about 95%, on a good year being able to identify what's coming in, that means there's about 10 sightings every year that we can't identify. And that's pretty cool. That's good evidence. And in the meantime, our very well-trained investigators go out and they just really nail it in terms of identifying a lot of the things that aren't anomalous out there. So yeah, it's kind of funny that the government is doing such a sloppy job here, and that press conference, the open congressional hearing, back in May, I think that is the most telling thing. If anybody is wondering how good of a job they're doing on this subject, the very little background knowledge that the Department of Defense representatives showed in that open congressional hearing, it was really embarrassing. One of the gentlemen representing the Department of Defense was unaware, apparently, of any UFO investigative efforts from the government and military prior to Project Blue Book. So he was unaware of Project Sign, Project Rudge. Like, you are in a field of work that is the same, you are the next in line of this legacy of the military investigating the phenomena, and you're not even familiar with the earliest efforts into this. They just really didn't seem to know what they were talking about. And this new report is a bunch of numbers. We're not going to get any good details out of those missing numbers probably, and then people will forget about it, and it'll come back.
What about any new videos? Did they include any new images along with this new preliminary report?
I did not see any. If there are, I'm remiss in.
I didn't see any either. I just figured you were more dialed in than I was on that. I didn't see any, and I was looking for it because the ones they put up last time were significant. Okay, I want to ask you about something else then. So other people are saying, well, okay, this is unusual. These flight characteristics are unusual. Let me ask Bill Konkolesky coming up in just a minute. What else could they be, in his opinion, in his research? And are we looking at other countries having aircraft that are capable of things that ours aren't? We'll leave it there for the moment. Here's little Jeff Beck with the Yardbirds doing Jeff's Blues. Going to be honoring him all night on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Lots to get to. I'm going to do something which I don't usually do on Fridays, which I'm going to move to open the lines a little early. Not open lines, but calls for Bill Konkolesky starting at the beginning of the top of the next hour. So top of the next hour, we'll go ahead and we'll give you the numbers that you can join the conversation. We won't wait because I know there'll be a lot of people who want to get in on this. We're talking about the newly amended preliminary report. They're not giving us the full report. Now it's our second draft of a preliminary report that includes new sightings from the Department of Defense, right? Directly from the Pentagon. And 171 unexplained appearances of UAPs, mostly by Navy and Air Force and commercial pilots. These are people who don't, they have got some skin in the game. There's some flight surgeons involved. They don't want to get decertified. They don't want to get grounded. So the fact that they're coming out and admitting, now that it's been destigmatized, and saying, look, this is what I saw, and here's my video. They didn't release any more video, but it's out there. So we'll just have to keep on this subject until they do the right thing. One of those is to keep talking to Bill Konkolesky, and he's going to break down for us what it could be. Like, as an investigator with MUFON, what else could these be? As he said, in Michigan, they clear 95% of the cases, so it only leaves like 10 a year, which end up going unexplained, a much lower percentage than the Department of Defense. So what else? What are other ways that can account for these phenomena? And we'll get to that in just a minute. Bill Konkolesky is next, and we'll find out what else could be in that report that we're just not hearing about next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So, Bill Konkolesky, we hear that the Pentagon has expressed in the past, through these Department of Defense preliminary assessments, that they're not saying the 171 cases, which they have most recently identified, are little green men, which they can't possibly. I wouldn't expect them to. It would be illogical for them to say, oh, well, that proves this. But they have intoned that maybe this is a foreign government, that maybe this is an existing terrestrial technology that we don't have. Where are you with that?
Okay. Now, one of the things that I think is important to know about looking into what it could be based upon these witnesses, were primarily Navy and Air Force pilots, is that basically, what I do as a grassroots UFO investigator, I take reports from untrained observers in many cases, civilians, people in their backyard, seeing things up in the sky at a distance, not being a trained pilot. And so, and those cases are all valid too, the ones that we can identify and not identify. But in this particular case, you have trained military pilots observing and reporting, which is, it's not really an apples to apples. So the type of things that we often get in MUFON from the type of civilian observers to phenomena, we do get a heavier number of weather phenomena, a lot of unidentified, just basic aircraft, not even exotic aircraft. People will mistake regular airplanes as something that they think is anomalous, and it sure isn't. Along with some really interesting cases. I'm not going to dismiss or tell somebody not to report their sighting to MUFON because, we want to do our best to help you identify things and then also hear some of the more interesting cases too. So when we look at these trained pilot sightings and they see something and they don't know what it is, they're looking at it through a different lens. And certainly the possibility, I think, is there that some of these things could be exotic aircraft that are not yet publicly known. I often say that the stealth helicopter did not exist until the night it crashed in Pakistan. And then the world learned that the United States had aircraft that they had not revealed to the rest of the world. No surprise that this sort of thing exists. And when you think about it, back in the 1960s, when a computer filled an entire room, we went to the moon with that technology. And in the 50-plus years, my watch probably is more sophisticated and technologically advanced than these room-sized computers. And yet, where has the aerospace technology been to keep up with this sort of pace of technology? When you look at, after landing on the moon, we didn't go back yet. And, the space shuttle was kind of cool. The space stations are kind of cool. But you would think that if, the aerospace industry followed that same arc of technology, although, stealth bomber's cool, I'll give it that. But you would think that we would be so far in advance of where we were in the 60s when you look at that same technology arc, just with technology in general. And we're not seeing that, and it's mysterious. And, of course, the huge numbers of dollars going into the black budget. So I think that every major government out there that probably has a nice a war chest that it can tinker with, they probably have some really phenomenal aircraft out there that are not being reported. And when these pilots see some of that, sure, I just think it's almost common sense that it could be something particularly like the Chinese might have flying around that they haven't openly reported to the rest of the world, keeping their hand very close to them. And also, I've seen enough cases to think that, maybe we are being visited. So, I'm not going to take that out of the mix, being visited by beings from elsewhere. But, yeah, I think that some of these things might be exotic aircraft from other governments.
Yeah, which is almost 100 times more terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, because the beings that are visiting us probably have these egalitarian civilizations that have been around maybe thousands of years, just speculating, here. But,
right.
But if I think of the people I know, if they got a hold of a fighter craft, yikes.
Yeah, exactly. And they won't eat the Canadians first, which is, they won't be persuaded to do that. But I think if there are foreign governments who have this capability, you mentioned your watch scenario, I think the better comparison is a smartphone. And the last time I looked at the number, it was way higher than a multiplier, a single-digit multiplier. It was like 50 times more powerful than a smartphone was, than a room full of tech from just 1965. That it's incredible how much and how little it takes now to and how much media is possible in a smartphone, which would have taken trucks and trucks of people and teams to be able to bounce off of satellites and whatever, and we do all of this just through Wi-Fi and cell phones. So, I mean, you're right. We kind of take it for granted. We don't know yet if we've made these leaps, what other people have done with their budgets, with their secret line items, and where they're putting their money. Who knows what they could have achieved? When was the last time you personally, or MUFON, in your experience in Michigan, investigated an abduction case?
The track of abductions is a slightly different track than sightings. For those who might not know the way that MUFON operates, generally when MUFON was founded in 1969, the chassis of the organization was to look into flying saucers, unidentified things in the skies, UFOs.
Right.
But along with that certainly came these first-hand contact encounters, and we do get a lot of them, and many come from very credible individuals. And I myself have seen some strange stuff, but the way that MUFON handles it, there is an experiencer resource team. When you report a UFO sighting, and I have a fun Friday the 13th one if we have a moment to get to it in just a second. But
yeah, go ahead.
But when people report a UFO sighting to us, it's very easy to check the boxes. It was moving at this speed. It was this color. I saw it for this long. But when it comes to a first-hand contact experience, these are, personal narratives that take a long time to unpack, and often somebody who has one contact experience has multiple, and sometimes they relate to each other, and it's a whole different way to investigate it. Whole different tool set is needed, and there are people within our organization that look into the experiencer phenomena. So I don't know offhand what I could hang up and say, hey, this is the last one we got. But, I've just today got a very lengthy encounter report from somebody who had a contact. So I would say as recently as today.
Okay, so do you hand those off then to other people who specialize in that?
Often. In this particular case, I know the person personally, and so I'm sort of helping them myself. Now, we call it the Experiencer Resource Team rather than Research Team, because it's a very difficult phenomena to encapsulate, to define. There's a lot of different things people say. I'm an experiencer. I have this phenomena, like shadow beings come in my dreams. I have somebody else say I'm an experiencer. Little gray guys came into my house. And there's such a wide variety of the type of phenomena that we say resource, because the resource is to help that person, to comfort that person, to connect that person possibly with other people that have similar types of phenomena. So in this particular case, when somebody I know personally wants help, I start out having that conversation with them, and then quite often, the Experiencer Resource Team can pick up from that point. And many people report their encounters directly to MUFON, and those go right into the Experiencer Resource Team.
So the resource team, tell me more about that. Who qualifies for that?
Who qualifies to participate in it?
Yeah. I mean, for people who are interested in doing that.
Okay. So currently, you have to be a MUFON member and be a field investigator already. And then there is an additional training that is done on top of that to deal with some of these individuals. I also personally know a great number of people in the psychological field, doctors that are sympathetic, are allies to people that have the trauma associated with this kind of phenomena. We have a regressionist here in Michigan that also helps the experiencers. And so we do have qualified, compassionate people on hand, rather than just sort of curiosity. People that are just wanting to hear a good story out of an experiencer. We do have a good support system. I run a support group. There are many other great support groups out there. We are, our heart is definitely with these people that are struggling with the strangest that the UFO phenomena can hand out.
Yeah. This Friday the 13th story, was that you were referencing the person who sent today, or was that on top of that?
Oh, no. So a couple of years ago, it was 2021, and it was a Friday the 13th. It was August 13th, 2021. Somebody reported that they were just north of the Mackinac Bridge, which connects the lower peninsula and upper peninsula of Michigan. So they were just north of the bridge, and they pulled into a gas station which was closed down, so they decided to relieve themselves there in the dark. And it was about 11 p.m. And then they saw this large black disc fly silently about 100 feet above them at the treetop, just very round and black and just flying. And there were some very minimal lights on the bottom of it, and it flew off. And what amuses me about this sighting, well, first of all, it's definitely in the unknown category, because either they are hoaxing or this is, something phenomenal. But what tickled me was the report was made on August 13th, 2021, but it actually happened on September 13th, 2019, which is also a Friday the 13th.
That's very interesting. And what I am intrigued about, too, is one of the things they mentioned in this report was the destigmatization of UAP reporting, and that may account for the increase, that it doesn't mean there's necessarily more sightings. But I wonder how much, it's sort of just a side point, how people, there's no real quantitative data. We haven't been able to have any sort of qualitative interviews with the people who are making new sightings. I wonder how many of them just thought that their lives, not quite in a superstitious way, but how many of them thought that they would be doomed if they came forward and they made these, and they told what they saw, and now it's not a big deal. And as evidence of the fact that it's not a big deal is the Pentagon is putting it out, and it's not a big deal. So I wonder whether that will see more and more people fearing like their career being cursed by having made a UAP report to somebody, that, if I do that, I'm going to take this to my grave, or I'll tell my children before I die, or something like that. And instead, they're like, "Yep, saw it. Here we go." And then they're able to move on, because there isn't anybody that's out there ready to yank your license if you're a doctor, or ground you if you're a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
one can only hope that there's more witnesses coming up.
But I do think that it's not quite in the realm of superstition, but I think that there was a lot of folks who thought that maybe even questioned their own sanity as a result. And now that enough of this confirmation has come out from other sources, they're thinking, yeah, okay, well, you can. It's not just me. These aren't voices in my head. It's not evidence of some sort of hallucination I'm having. So all the more important, though, it is to get those videos, as you mentioned, of the guy in TV from Kalamazoo, or any of the other people out there who may have taken a photograph, whether it's in Michigan or anywhere else, that they can pass along and they can show, look at this. How do you analyze aerial photography? How do you analyze either video, film, or still photos at MUFON?
Well, we have, like Mark D'Antonio, he's right now one of the people that we have that very aggressively takes apart photographs. And many of the things that I saw at first blush made me wonder. He's very quick to be able to say, look at this shadow. This is impossible. And so a lot of the videos now, they can be fairly easily identified. It's not much of a challenge. So some of the stuff that we're getting in from people on airplanes, taking videos, it's not the fancy cameras you see, like these gun cameras or anything on these military craft.
Well, hang on to that thought, because then we'll come back to that. And we'll use that as we lead off getting comments and questions for Bill Konkolesky of Michigan MUFON. And we'll do that coming up next on Coast to Coast AM. We'll get to your calls. We gave you the numbers. There's already a bunch of people hanging on and want to talk to Bill Konkolesky. If you want to join the conversation, you can call now on this subject, or you can keep your powder dry if you've got something else you want to talk about, because we'll do open lines an hour from now on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Just for Snicks, I posted a photo of what it looks like when I do Coast to Coast in the middle of the night. I think I do the show the same way that most people listen to it, so I put up a photo of that on Twitter. And hi, Leon, and hi, Colby, and anybody else that's my colleagues, like my friend Ed Weigel, who may be listening right now, or for that matter, Kevin. So we've got a Kevin hanging on. We've got a bunch of other people, too, who want to talk with Bill Konkolesky. Let's finish up that thought, though, that we were just talking about before the top of the hour, Bill, about being able to detect what is and what isn't a fake, or how do we analyze these photos, especially as the faking, the manipulation of these images has become so prevalent and deep fakes are so easy now. Do UFO investigators raise their game in terms of what they study and how they're able to analyze something in order to sort of sort out what is a deep fake and what is an actual photograph or video?
Yeah, one of the benefits of doing photo analysis is that, for example, back in the 90s when people were really impressed with things, and we got to, get a handful of tips and tricks to look at some of these pictures to be able to identify the obvious hoaxes. As these hoaxers fade out, our skill set just increases and increases. And so now the sophistication of investigation is, I think we're still keeping a step or two ahead of the hoaxers. And, one of the problems is that back in the day, somebody would shoehorn a fake thing into a real photograph.
Right.
And then it got to the point with people being able to actually fake the whole thing. They fake the background and the UFO in it. But there's still a lot of things, and I won't fully show our hand. But one of the great things, like when I bring up like Mark D'Antonio, who I did, one of our photo analysis guys, as he does computer graphics for his career, and so he knows the tool sets that are capable of creating some of these videos that aren't real. Another thing that happens too when somebody does a hoax, they'll rarely share it with MUFON as their first step. What they'll do is they'll dump it into social media. It'll go right to a TikTok or a YouTube, and manage to get all those people looking at it, especially the way that some of these social media sites can monetize clicks. And, that's where they'll dump it because, credulous people will look and say, oh, my gosh, that's amazing. And then, they'll reap all the financial benefits and get their 15 seconds of fame before actual UFO investigators come in and say, no, this isn't real.
Right.
And, they rarely come to us. And when they do, it's for validation so that they can post it on social media and say, look, even MUFON says it's real.
Right. Very interesting. Sign of the times. East of the Rockies, Kevin is in Corpus Christi on Coast to Coast AM. Kevin?
Yes, hi.
Hi, you're talking to Bill Konkolesky.
Hi, nice to talk to you. I've been lucky enough. I grew up around the Kern County area, if you know where that is, in California. So I
do not.
as a kid.
Okay.
What was that?
Oh, I don't personally, but yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's around where Edwards Air Force Base is. And growing up as kids, spending a lot of time out in the desert at night, you see a lot of things that if you got to figure out real fast, it's something that you normally don't see. And I've seen a lot of things as a kid that doesn't make a lot of sense until you get around the military and get around aviation, and it makes a lot of sense. But then again, you see a lot of things that doesn't make a lot of sense. So that kind of background with me, I check in a lot of aviation, figure out different planes, things like that. But my two questions would be, what's it going to take for the U.S. government to open up the books and say, hey, this is what we actually have, what we know? And the second question would be, where would I go to look to find credible information about UFOs?
Bill?
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. So I'll take the questions in order. So what would it take for disclosure, maybe to put the question in that respect? I think that the government and military, they're understanding now that the acceptance of the variety of things that can cause this phenomena, like as you often have been hearing in the bumpers on the show, yeah, nobody says that UFOs aren't real anymore. It's just a matter of what they are. So I think a small percentage, very small percentage probably, of what people are seeing is something that is not from Earth. But the fact that anything is coming from elsewhere is a huge deal. And they are trying to get ahead of the issue now by putting out these the sort of drip feed of releases of information, like the report that we just got, saying here's a number of sightings, some identified, some unidentified. And because in, say, maybe just a few years, this report is required to go on to 2026. Pardon me for sort of rambling in my answer, but I'm just trying to make the point that they know that at one point it's going to be undeniable that we're being visited. And because of that, they are sort of just very lightly giving out very small tidbits of validation now, so that when it becomes clear, when a UFO lands on the White House lawn, so to speak, and people say, you knew about this, didn't you, government? You knew about this, didn't you, military? Instead of standing there with their pants down, they'll be able to say, yeah, we've been telling you about this for years. We put out a report every year. We're on your side. We've been giving you the information. What it would take, I think, is something that is undeniable. And short of that, they're not going to release information.
I want to put an addendum.
Military.
I want to put an addendum on that. Okay, and this is what I would proffer. That while everything you said may be true, what if the DOD is happy to allow this concept of visitation? Happy to allow people, give them bread and circuses, and in the meantime, they're panicking because the people that actually can and have hurt us, hostile governments, have this type of technology that we don't have and we haven't been able to figure out. And maybe, as you mentioned, 2026, they're trying to buy time until they can unveil the fact that we can do what they do. And in the meantime, they distract us with this head fake, and that that's why they're perfectly willing to put out a number like 171, because they know that's not real. They know the real thing is that China or Russia or somebody else has aerial technology superior to ours, and that's what they think would make the American public actually panic. That that's what would send everything crazy if they thought that China could land a craft in the White House lawn. and be able to fly underneath our radar and be able to fly between our fighters and whatever. That's what they're worried about more. And that if it were an alien, they come off as very benevolent. It's like, well, they've been here. They're E.T. E.T. would never hurt us. He'd give us Reese's Pieces and we go away, But they really are worried about other things. What do you think of that?
Personally, there might be something to that. I think that they certainly have a lot to be concerned about with other governments. And also, if it's ever revealed that humanity isn't the biggest thing going in the universe.
True.
What people will think about our government if they realize that there's greater powers out there and how we really fit into the big picture. I think any sort of scenario where they disclose, they lose. And so they're going to...
That's very well put.
So they're going to keep this theater going as long as possible until it's impossible.
Yeah, that's actually very well put. And as for the question of best sources, other than Coast to Coast AM, what other kind of thing would you recommend for somebody to actually track the development of these stories?
If you haven't been a regular visitor to MUFON.com site, I mean, I'm promoting my group because I know what we do. We investigate.
Right.
We are people that are critical, and I think that's evidenced by the fact that we're able to identify most of what's going on, and we're well trained. And the information that we release on the website and in our publications, I think, is solid. And you can go other places that where people report their sightings, but I mean, we investigate them. So that when something gets to you, it's been reviewed and come to the conclusion that this is something that's worth your time to take a look at. So okay. I really don't think there's anything else quite out there like MUFON.
I accept that. Gary is on a wild card line in Bullhead City, Arizona. I have not been to Bullhead City, but I've been to Kingman, which is right nearby, isn't it?
Yeah, Kingman's about an hour east of Bullhead City. And I'm about 15 miles south of Bullhead City.
Wow.
I'm in an area where there's absolutely no nightlight pollution.
Oh, beautiful.
The sky is crystal clear during the day, and also at night there's spectacular for nighttime viewing.
I bet.
And I've noticed since April 19th at 8:25 p.m., I was watching the space station go over in the area and had my youngest brother on the phone who lives in Southern California. And we're both watching the space station, and all of a sudden I see right in the area where the space station is, I see a bright red light start at the site of the space station, and it shoots straight across southward within a second or two, and it disappears in the south. I'm thinking it was a hypersonic weapons testing system. But as I'm asked my brother to see it, he says he didn't notice anything.
Yeah.
So next thing, I'm watching for the next 2 hours, and instead of seeing that same sight again, I noticed that up in the sky, in the darkness around the stars and planets, I'm seeing these super small specks of red color lights fill the sky. It's like a power source. I stare in one small section of the sky, doesn't matter what direction, and all of a sudden these red dots start expanding as if this power field is forming, and it fills the rest of the night sky. And then if I stare in one particular point, I could hold my hand out away from me and look at my small pinky fingernail, and I see a group of lights about that size start to move in any direction it wants to go. I've never heard on Coast to Coast since Art Bell days in the 80s, I've never heard anybody else describe what I'm seeing every night, and now during the daytime, I notice the same shapes, but only in a cloud cover area, like a power source. So I reported it as a MUFON member, and I had somebody interview me for about an hour on the phone, and I haven't heard any responses since. And that was in April of this year, or of last year. And I'm just curious, has anybody else reported anything like that?
Well, Bill is in customer service for MUFON, so Bill.
Yeah, the customer service was the exact phrase I'm thinking. Yeah. So when you say that you haven't heard back, did you reach out to the investigator again? I'm just wondering.
Yes,
I'm not sure what the breakdown in communication is, but sitting in the customer service hot seat, I'm wondering if you maybe could reach out to them again, or possibly even the state director of that chapter and ask for a follow-up on your assessment. It's possible, they just got caught up in whatever was going on in their lives and maybe didn't touch back with you. But, I would follow up. I'm sure somebody will give you some kind of response.
Have you heard yourself of anybody else reporting something like that? Because this can't be just in the Arizona skies.
Yeah.
I mean, it's universal as far as I can tell.
No, when you talk about lights that do things that lights shouldn't in the sky, our reports are filled with things like that, even multiple objects. And I'm not just talking about the Starlink satellites that everybody has been reporting lately. If, when they launch in the chain and it looks like a fleet of flying saucers. But when you talk about it happening on a persistent basis, that should provide grounds for an investigator to be able to join you and possibly observe the things that you're observing at the same time you're observing them. And I think that would be a hopeful thing that you might be able to achieve. If you were in Michigan, I'd say I'll drive out, look at the sky with you. But, I would probably, if for some reason, whatever the situation of the MUFON chapter is that's difficult, I would get anybody out there with you, just any sort of additional witness to join you and take a look at it. If it's a persistent thing, then you could get other witnesses. You could even get the media in on it if it's something that you're seeing on a regular basis. That is like, the holy grail of the UFO phenomena, to have a recurring event that is observable, because so often UFO events are very quick events. People see something in the sky for maybe 3 to 5 seconds and they never see it again, because the domain of the sky is not something where you're necessarily going to see something repeat itself. But pull other people in, get their opinions, and take it from there. And definitely reach back to the MUFON chapter and ask what their assessment was of your sighting, because they probably have something, in our database that they'll be able to say, oh, let's take a look at that. Oh, this is where this investigation ended up.
Well, very good. Well, if you asked me to stick around afterward and give a rating to my customer service on this call, I'd rate that high. Good job on that. And we still have a half hour with you and Bill Konkolesky. If you can hang on, he will. And then we'll go open lines coming up on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. We'll go to open lines coming up next hour on Coast to Coast. And I don't think I'm off to a very good start. Frequently we do open lines, and people ask me questions and stuff, and I don't know. I've already got a couple of significant big X's in my homework, so this could be very embarrassing coming up next hour. I'll be listening. I hope you will too. And we'll get to those open lines and the rest of your comments for Bill Konkolesky next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. All right, so many people hanging on. Let's see how many we can get through. So try to keep your questions short. For Bill Konkolesky, we'll go west of the Rockies. Charles in Sacramento on Coast to Coast. Charles?
Hi, Ian. Okay, short question then. Are abductees discouraged from participating in field research for abductees until some recency between their own abduction has it transpired. And for Ian,
great question.
We talked a while back about. I talked about the Ross Perot campaign and the insertion of images and backhauling. Maybe during open lines you could address that. And the guy in San Diego who's missing his wife, man, I think about you all the time. Thank you, Ian.
Those are very sweet thoughts. So the way it's going for me tonight, I probably won't remember about the Ross Perot thing, but I made a note. I'll try to do it. But that's a good question about, like, does one have, in order to maintain one's research credibility, what criteria do you use for disqualification if somebody has had many encounters or a personal encounter?
I'm hearing a lot of variations of what the question could mean here. So I'm going to start off, and if I'm off track, let me know. So with regards to who is qualified to investigate an experiencer's accounts, if being an experiencer makes you seem non-critical, I would, because you're just going to believe somebody else who says they've had an encounter because you've had one yourself, and that makes you more open to the idea. I tend to think that those who are experiencers have a better critical eye, much in the same way that those who are UFO witnesses are more critical UFO investigators. Because if you've never seen a UFO, you bring to the table the wall of you've never seen the phenomena, so it's all speculation to you. If you have seen a UFO, though, you say, well, maybe it is something anomalous. Maybe it isn't. And it provides, I think, a more balanced perspective because you can say, maybe this is, maybe this isn't. And with the case of the experiencer phenomena, it is such a broad scope of people and what they encounter and how they describe it. You could have, 3 different people experience the same exact thing, and their personal filters of how they interpret the universe are going to make a huge difference. Like maybe you have like a staunch Catholic who thinks demons are coming to visit, somebody who's, I could go on with categories. You get the picture.
Yeah, I get the idea, but I think there's some truth to that in one sense. If we look at it like a voir dire, and who would be acceptable for being seated in a jury, and somebody said, an attorney said, "Well, raise your hand if you've been shot by a gun." And the case is about people who are suing the gun manufacturers. They may be somebody that you don't want on a jury to give an objective view of that, because they may still be harboring different feelings about it one way or another.
Yeah, I totally get you there. Where I think this is sort of different is it's as if you said something like, one of the questions to be seated on that jury is, do you believe anybody's ever been shot?
Right.
And if somebody raises their hand, and it's that big of a threshold to say that they and we do see a lot of investigators come in that walk away and say, hey, I've not been impressed by any of the sightings that have come in to me personally. I'm just going to think that there's nothing at all to this phenomena. And, they come in with that hardened perception. I think to have a little bit of give is, to say that, and if somebody's never seen anything and they believe somebody else, I don't know, if that's as valuable either as somebody who has seen something that can look in a balanced way of saying, I know there's things out there that are unexplainable in the sky. Let me, still look at this critically with the training that I've received and try to make the most of it that way. I think that is the most open-minded critic. To say that something is viable or not is somebody who's had that type of experience.
Cheryl's on a wild card line in Missouri on Coast to Coast. Cheryl?
Hey, thank you, Gina, and hey, Ian and Bill. Fascinating concepts here. I want to ask, how do I figure out the difference anymore between, it's all the God and faith and science and logic and souls and minds? How to reconcile all these controversial? I know it's a big, huge question I'm asking.
No. You know, it's a really good start, and I'll stop Bill from answering, and I'll just say, go to this. Go to there's a famous it's a papal encyclical called Fides et Ratio. So it's faith and reason, and it's a question about balancing faith and reason, and it's not exclusive to a Catholic worldview, but it's very informative, and I think it remains one of the best ways of looking at those two things, because lots of times people mistake one for the other, and this is a way of saying, no, they're two different things. Sometimes they overlap a little bit, maybe in the subject matter, but it's legitimate to look at both either way. Mary's in L.A. on Coast to Coast AM. Mary?
Yeah, I have to tell you that I've been on Coast to Coast before and listened religiously, and never in a million years that I think that I would question my judgment when it comes to psychic phenomena. But I am getting messages on my cell phone, text messages in binary code from Diana, who has a clone on Earth named Artemis Soltera. Artemis Soltera is the most unusual human being I've ever met. I mean, I'm not sure she's fully human. And
well,
the reason I'm saying this is that...
Yeah, but this is really important, but it's not on the subject of what we're talking about right now. Can you hang on? We can get to that for open lines coming up, because we've got some people that want to talk to Bill. And I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say, but right at this exact moment, that probably would take us down a different path. So if you can hang on or call back, we would love to have you for open lines, or in the first hour tomorrow night when we have on Glynis McCanson. We'll be talking about the latest about the Diana research and the royal family from a numerological standpoint. Roger, have we done Roger? Let's do Roger. I think, Roger, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you are also in Missouri.
Yes, sir, Wentzville.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, back in March of last year, I just moved in my apartment. Actually, it was in November. And the following year, I was in this, it's like a four-family flat. It's about 50 feet by 50 feet. And that night, it was March 1st, around 3 o'clock in the morning. I was unpacking my stuff. I still wasn't all the way moved in. And I heard some geese or ducks flying in from outside. You know, it was dark. I kind of took a break, walked outside and looked around, see what was going on, you know, and just get some fresh air. So I looked towards the south, and I didn't see nothing. I just heard the ducks squawking. They're coming back from the south going north. And then I looked down towards the parking lot, and I didn't see anything. So I turned around to my right, and I looked up, and there's a damn spacecraft, at least 40 feet long by 20 feet wide, just hovered. No noise, no lights. And the only way I seen that thing was they put new LED lights on the parking lot, and the bright lights over there, the glare off of it reflected off the bottom of this spacecraft. I'm going to call it that. I don't know what else to say. And then the neighbors' porch lights were on, and you can see the bottom of it. That's all I could see.
Well, where does it? So this is fascinating. But Bill Konkolesky is here. So do you have a question or a comment specifically for him, for Bill?
Well, I was going to say, have you ever heard any reports of a spacecraft or UFO shaped is like almost like a boomerang?
Oh, interesting.
It's got square tiles. You can see the bottom of it. It looks like square tiles on the bottom of it.
Yeah, the boomerang shape, the triangle shape. Okay, Bill, what do you think about that?
Sure, absolutely. We have, boomerang shapes reported to us. When the boomerangs are typically reported, though, they're often much larger than what you described, though the sort of plating on it is a pattern that's not unique. About how high up was it?
40 feet.
And how long did...
Yeah.
It was about 40 feet in the air?
I think that's basically what he said, yeah.
I remember him saying it was like about 40 feet wide, 20 feet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I may have conflated those two things. But but the boomerang shape is not surprising, nor is the way the tile arrangement underneath.
Yeah, though typically a boomerang shape usually implies a larger craft, sometimes a much, much larger craft. Some of these triangular and boomerang-shaped craft that people report, they report them as being, in fact, stadium-sized, like mammoth. Okay. And it's not to say that some people don't see smaller things. So if he's open, I say, have a conversation with the local MUFON chapter and delve into it a little bit more and see what comes out of that.
I think it would be very reaffirming to do that and find out that there have been other people who had a similar experience that night. Jim is on the Big Island in Hawaii, Coast to Coast AM. Jim?
Hello, Ian and Bill. I've watched the sky. I'm 67. I've watched the sky ever since I was a kid. Anyway, within the last month, I've seen two strange things. On the 27th of December, I'd seen a couple satellites go by because they're kind of dim and they move, kind of slow on one hand. And then I saw it was about 7:15 on the 27th. I saw a bright light, which I know aircraft because I used to be in the Marine Corps on the air wing. There was no marking lights or anything like that. It was just a white. It almost looked a little bit long, but not really.
Okay.
And I was thinking, geez, that's kind of high. And it was moving like 4 or 5 times faster than what a satellite would going across the sky. And then what got me was there was a cloud. And, kind of like at the edge of the cloud, how the stars are dimmer, until it completely blocks them out. Well, this thing went under the cloud.
Okay. That's interesting. You have
the cloud had to be about 6 to maybe 7,000 feet above sea level from the altitude where I'm at.
Do you have a question or something for Bill? Because he's going to be only here for a few more minutes, so I want to make sure that we get to that.
Then my next one, I guess, would be kind of more of a question like, what could this have been? I was looking at Mars about a week ago.
Okay.
And then if Mars was the center of the clock, about 8 o'clock, angle-wise, there was a flash. And then I kept looking at it and saying, did I see that? And then about 5 o'clock, there was another flash, direction-wise. And then it continued on, and then it turned into like a reddish light and then faded away.
Okay. So the question out of that is?
What might that have been?
Yeah, what that have been. Go ahead.
Okay, so what I hear in there is there are 20 questions that I want to ask just to sort of set the table about looking into it. And although we don't have that type of time, I will say that I've enjoyed hearing about your sighting. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the other people that have shared their sightings on here. To me, that's one of the best things about doing what I do is hearing other people share the amazing things they've seen. So, I'm going to do that short answer again to say, please report it to MUFON and have a nice in-depth conversation about what you've seen. And again, thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, if I weren't up against the top of the hour clock, I would love to hear more about that. But I'm afraid one story leads to another story, and then we don't actually take advantage of having you here, which is, I think, the thing that would benefit people the most. We have just enough time for Rusty and Pensacola. No? Okay, well that's what I was afraid of. So all right. So unfortunately, that'll do it for Bill Konkolesky this time, but we will have to have you back. So thank you again, Bill, and we'll be tracking both more additions to the preliminary assessment from the DOD. If you want to read that, you can find out more by going to coasttocoastam.com. Go to MUFON's national website and see some of the images there and start the conversation among yourself, and then get in touch with your local MUFON people. Bill, always a pleasure. And hang on, everybody else who wants to get in. We'll give you the numbers so that you could be part of Open Lines coming up next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. The guitar virtuosity of Jeff Beck, who died surprisingly earlier this week on Coast to Coast AM, as did several other legends. You know, people forget that Lisa Marie Presley put out 3 very well-received albums. I think the first and the third critically did better than the middle one, but still a talent in her own right. You know, I think it's one of those people, when you think about Lisa Marie Presley, you got to wonder, if she'd been a starving artist, would she have been a more successful one? But she had literally inherited like $100 million at age 25 and continued to make gobs of money on the Elvis estate, and which kind of takes away a little bit of that drive to create, perhaps. Anyway, she died sad, and it's, tragic to think about the fact that her broken heart may have gotten the best of her after the suicide of her son, even though she had other children to live for. They say that she never quite got over that, and it's the tragedy of the Princess Diana death. Some people say certainly murder, negligent homicide, however you want to look at it. Coming up tomorrow night, we'll re-examine that in the first hour from a numerological standpoint. We'll talk about the royal family, and Glynis McCants has never been wrong. She published a story in the Daily Mail, several stories, a series of pieces that she wrote about the royal family using their numbers. And it always panned out in terms of the relationships and the complications. And I just want to ask her, as a royal watcher, and then also from a numerological standpoint, what she thought about Prince Harry earlier this week. I guess he's a duke now, too, or whatever. But he said that he still doesn't believe the official report. I can't say as I blame him. So we'll talk about that in the first hour. And then after that, it's going to be Immortality for Billionaires with Bart Costco. And he's a fascinating guy, knows tons on the subject from perspectives that other people perhaps have not considered. Open Lines coming up more next with you on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. All right, so we've got plenty of time and lots of people to get to on Coast to Coast AM. That is a great combination for Open Lines, and so it is that we'll start where we left off. David is in Salem, New Hampshire on Coast to Coast. David?
Yes, good evening. How you doing, Ian?
Good. How are you?
All right. I love the show, man. It's very intense. It's hard for me to sleep. I'll listen to you guys, but I tell my friends I belong to Coast University. If they don't believe me, I said, listen to Coast. They're like,
I know.
They're like, where do you get your information from? I'm like, do you really believe what you're saying? But anyways, that guy, Bill, was amazing.
Wasn't he great? I love having him on.
He is. He really was. Wish we could have a little more questions for him. But that's fine. Everybody's story was unique, and it's always refreshing. But like I said, I live here in New Hampshire, and my question was to him is everybody missing the big picture and about experiences and stuff like that?
Well, you tell me, what do you think the big picture is?
I think that technology is great, but it's always propaganda. It's always used against us, but to really connect with everyone, we're all spiritual in some ways, and they look highly upon people that are trying to prove their life and not destroy their life, like we are humans, and we're just like a postage stamp. But to get on their level, you have to be spiritual. You have to think outside the box, not rely on MUFON. I love MUFON; they're great. I've told them stuff, and I've never got responses like I thought I would. And I'm from I live in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, but I'm from Salem, New Hampshire, and I live close to a place called the American Stonehenge.
Right. I've seen things about that.
Yes, well, I've been in big cities like Baltimore and stuff like that, where there's all kinds of stuff you can see without third generation optics or anything like that.
Right.
But
right. You live in a dark city.
Oh yeah, and no, I'm telling you, Baltimore is not very dark.
No, not like you are out on a mountaintop somewhere in New Hampshire, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I know people have had encounters right in the White Mountains. Like my daughter's mother, for instance, when my daughter was younger, she thought she saw a star up by the mountain that was on Tenny Mountain Highway in New Hampshire, and this thing came. She thought it was a star, but it came right down the road and disabled the car. She was scared. It went away. Car started, no problem.
Right.
But myself, when I was a little kid or whatever, like a lot of us, our first reality, mine was right during the daytime, and it was I thought. It looked like an aircraft coming in for re-entry. It just came out of space or whatever. It looked like the space shuttle, but it wasn't that visible. I couldn't identify its characteristics, but it went parallel. It didn't I've seen asteroids in New Hampshire and stuff like that fall right to the earth, and I wish I could find them. But seriously. Yeah. It would go parallel. It didn't. It was smoking, and you could hear. It was completely silent. You could hear the hissing and popping, like some cooling off in the atmosphere. But this thing didn't crash. It just kept on going.
That's a lot, and I'm glad you phoned those into MUFON or contacted MUFON, and I strongly encourage other people to do it too. And for anybody who lives in an area where there's very little light pollution, I wonder whether they're taking the time to look up as often as they should and to see what's out there, because that's about 50% of what we're hearing on open lines, or earlier when we had on Bill Konkolesky, is people who saw things because it wasn't obstructed by the ambient light reflecting either from, just regular industrial lighting going around a city or the reflection off of concrete. Let's go to first-time caller line. Kathy is so thank you, David, for calling and hanging on. Kathy's in Washington State on a first-time caller line on Coast to Coast. Kathy?
Oh, hi there. How are you this evening?
Good. Doing terrific. Where are you going to take us?
Well, I'm still on UFOs. I tried to get in earlier, but because I wanted to ask him a question. I'm a lifelong experiencer. One of my experiences is covered in The Unknown Other by Les Bellas, who was recently published book. But one thing I was going to ask about, and maybe the audience that's listening will have any ideas, but
sure.
I've seen quite a few different types of UFOs, and but I saw a really unusual one about a year and a half ago, and it's close to the Bangor base located in Bremerton, Washington.
Right.
And I was driving on a kind of a back highway with actually retired detectives from Seattle, and he's the one that said, "Kathy, I've been watching this for a while. What do you think this is?" And what it looked like, and was a huge jellyfish the size of, at least the size of a football field. And I'm just wondering if anybody else has seen any reports of anything like that.
When you say jellyfish, tell me what defined it like that.
Well, it looked just like a jellyfish, except it was long, it was long, say, oval, and it had tentacles hanging down the whole thing, just like a jellyfish would. It looked like an enormous jellyfish up in the sky. And I pulled out my phone, but by the time I got my phone out, it was over the woods, and there was it's real wooded
too
area.
far. Yeah. Was it kind of gelatinous? I mean, did it undulate?
It looked really like a jellyfish, but it was enormous. Like I said, it was at least the size of a football field, and I've gone on, YouTube and Google and trying to find some other sightings for that. I found some unusual things. I haven't found a jellyfish per se, but I've seen, like I said, my first experience I remember was when I was 12, the first one that I remember. Then I've had experiences all my life, and I've seen a number of different types of crafts, but I've never seen anything like that. It was definitely a unidentified flying object.
Sure, right, which is all that means.
Yeah, that's all that means. But it was just so unusual, and both of us were just stunned. He says, I saw my first UFO with you, and the thing is that. It's something that was just so inexplicable and puzzling. I had contacted. You probably had Ruben. You were already on your show at some time. He's a director for I think it's Northern California MUFON, and I told Ruben about it, and he wanted me to put it in on the MUFON site. I still have it recorded, but I didn't put it on the site because it just seems so bizarre. But I thought you have a big listening audience. Maybe somebody else could call in and say, yes, I saw one like that, or heard of somebody saying something like that.
Well, let's clear the deck and see that we can. Thank you for putting that out there, and I would agree with Ruben. That's the most important thing to do, is put it out there so that other people can see it where they're likely to go looking for it. All right, so I think this is the same Mary who we spoke with last hour, who was interjecting a conversation about Princess Diana. We're going to have that in the first hour tomorrow night, but this is open line, so I said you can hang on and we'll do it then. Mary, is that you?
Me. Stop doing stupid stuff. I'm very comfortable this way. If I feel like sleeping next to you, I will.
Okay, well, are you talking to me?
Hello?
Hi.
I'm just yelling at my friend. I'm sorry.
Who's your friend?
Oh, God, some guy from Iran. I'm his caregiver, and it's impossible. Anyway, I want to talk about Diana.
I want to talk about him. He wants you to sleep next to him?
Like that formed over. He's got cancer or something, and I don't want him to die. And I keep yelling at him, you can't walk around, you're going to fall. And he fell.
Yeah, and he fell.
Twice today. And he's like, he thinks he can do anything. And I got a wheelchair for him.
I know. I just went through this with my mother-in-law. I went through it with my mother-in-law. I know, but I went through it with my mother-in-law, and she was close to 90, but she kept doing that too. And we kept saying, Mom, you cannot walk. You're going to fall over. And she would be, but now I can. And in the middle of the night, then we get a call, can you come over? And she we bought a house next door so that she could live in it, right by. And we would go over, and it was the same thing over and over again. She just refused. And every time she'd hit the floor harder and harder and harder. Oh,
I literally I saved his life, okay? I prayed over him, and he came back to life, and he refuses to admit that I did anything. And he's mad now that talking about it.
Well, then we won't talk about it.
I don't even care.
But that's okay. He deserves his privacy, but I'm glad you filled us in on that.
But that's not what I'm talking about. Wait,
I know. So go ahead. You were talking about Princess Diana, and you said you were getting messages or something?
No. Diana and Artemis is the same, like a goddess, Greek goddess.
Okay.
I thought they were talking about the Greek goddess. Anyway, please pretend like, you're at Coast to Coast, and I don't have to go through this, but I believe everything I hear on Coast to Coast. I've been to, Dr. Bruce, Goldstein, whatever his name is. I do past lives. But when I started getting like messages from another realm, I'm like, what? Oh, this is a trick. I get like binary code messages in my texting. And then she does voicemail in some kind of a Martian that I sort of understand. And she said, I am your pro bono psychic. Her name is Diana. And she has a counterpart, a clone, living down the hall from me at the Madison Hotel. And we're best friends. And we're doing this, like, psychic reading together. And one of them is an atheist. She's an atheist, and she believes in communism. And I voted for Trump. I mean, come on. And we're like family. Because Diana is my mother, and Diana is her mother. In other words, Diana is my daughter. I'm sorry. And she's from, and we all were together in the Irish life, but now she's in some other planet version of Earth, fighting eons and, trillions and billions and Google numbers of people to keep peace. And she says, I worked so hard to get to you. And all you want to do is talk about Billy. Who's Billy? No, talk about the multiverse, the end of the world, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I want to talk about Billy. And she is so frustrated with me. I want you to come to this place.
I don't know who Billy is. Tell me about Billy. What do you mean by that?
Billy is like Ricky Nelson, only like 65 years old. He looks like Ricky Nelson with gray hair. And I just fell for him because he looks like him. He sings Mary Lou to me. Oh, Ian, he's awful. I have a big crush, and I'm already 73 years old. I should know better.
Yeah, I mean, well, so will you have a relationship with this Billy then?
Well, I have. I mean, I'm his caregiver, too. But I wanted to be with benefits, like big benefits. Oh.
Okay.
And he likes other women.
Well, guys are like that.
Kill myself. What?
I said, too many guys are like that, so...
Especially the good-looking ones that look like Ricky Nelson and sing like him.
Well,
I'm too old for a crush on Ricky Nelson. He died a long time ago.
Well, but according to you, he might be alive somewhere, right?
Well, it looks like a clone. Anyway, Let's talk about clones. Ours is a clone of Diana, and we're going to be on the radio. I mean, we're going to be on stage. If you want to see us Thursday at the 7th Street and Broadway, it's like a bar. And if we bring like 3 people each, we can be comedians. And we're going to tell you all about Diana.
That's okay. So I'll be happy to plug this, although I don't live in Los Angeles. So where is your performance going to be?
Okay. I don't know the name of the bar because we were just passing by, and this comedian says, hey, I'm a comedian, I'm going to be on. And I'm like, oh, so am I. How can I get on? Because I've been on the Comedy Store. I mean, I've been on the Gong Show 8 times. I'm literally
You were on the Gong Show?
8 times. It was the highlight of my life. They paid me. They called me to come for auditions.
What did you do?
I got gongs. I got paid very well.
But what was your talent? What did you do?
Well, obviously, I have a talent, but I wouldn't try. I sing opera, but I do parodies of opera. Like I did the Agony and the Ecstasy of Motherhood. And I sang La Traviata. Oh, yeah. You kids, how could you so embarrass me?
Right.
When we go to the shopping mall.
Wow.
Don't you know?
Well, I love all that. And so I'm happy to promote that. See the woman that was on the Gong Show 8 times and at that performance, too, at the same time. Thank you so much for hanging on, Mary. And it just goes to show you, when it comes to open lines, you never know what's going to happen. And that's just what we want. So where are you going to take us? We'll find out coming up in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Coming up tomorrow night, though, big show. Don't miss it. We will talk about Princess Diana in the first hour, and then on to Immortality for Billionaires. And that is, Bart Costco has a lot of different perspectives on that. We've heard him before on Coast to Coast, and I'm looking forward to getting more from him coming up tomorrow night. We've got more open lines to get to in just a second on Coast to Coast. This is Ian Punnett. It was just, we were talking to Mary from Los Angeles, and I looked up opera Gong Show appearances, and I think I found a video of our last caller singing on the Gong Show. Can't tell because I had the sound off on my computer because I'm in the middle of my own Gong Show, and I guess that's makes me Chuck Barris, right? Or J.P. Morgan, if nothing else. Carl is in Canada on Coast to Coast AM. Carl?
Hello, God bless you. Actually, my mother was born on January the 13th, and she said that was she didn't like the number 13. It was unlucky. She blamed a lot of things on the number 13. And
now, people who are born on the 13th, they say that becomes your lucky number.
Yeah, no, like the bikers like to get together on the Friday the 13th, and they like the number 13. Yeah, I don't know when did that start. Like, people won't like the number 13. Like,
that started apparently. I mean, as the legend has it, on the roundup of the Knights Templar. That a decree went out from the Pope after the Knights Templar, who had enjoyed fairly sort of unilateral autonomy within the service of the church, had grown so powerful that they were considered a threat by some. And so when the politics of the church changed and they decided that they needed to take out the Knights Templar, and they accused them of all sorts of horrible crimes, mostly Satan-related, witchcraft, that kind of thing, they were rounded up according to that decree on a Friday, which happened to be the 13th of the month.
She said she was going to come back and haunt me. But
your mother?
I said it more as a joke, but yeah, she hasn't come back. But she believed in ghosts. She had ghost stories, and she thought, she had the possibility, could come back. And I told her, you won't be coming back to haunt me because I'm a Christian. I didn't believe God would allow her to come back to haunt me or visit me. But she believed in that stuff.
Well, that's in the Bible, though, right? I mean, there is what is generally referred to as reincarnation kind of descriptions in the Bible. So don't, before you make it seem like that's a totally, I mean, I'm not proposing it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that you're wrong. But if it doesn't, being a Christian doesn't mean, if you're a biblical Christian anyway, you have to accept that a lot of people thought that when they saw others, they thought they had been witnessing somebody's rebirth or somebody's reappearance from the afterlife.
Well, when Jesus died, they said some spirits were walking around. They seen some ghosts, like something happened there. It's in the New Testament, but that doesn't happen very often. So just on rare occasions.
Well, we don't know that, right? So, I mean, it happened there, is all I'm saying. But so if your mother haunts you, though, I hope you will plan on calling us back, right?
I'll get her to give you guys a call.
Yeah, have her give us a call. That'd be really good. I'll be counting on that. So I appreciate that, Carl. Let me get in Todd from Washington State. Open lines on Coast to Coast. Todd?
Thank you, Mr. Pundit. Now, I would like to say that Mrs. Riley DeGarmo has released a solo album in 2020, and Christopher James DeGarmo has written some songs called...
I believe you
Prophecy.
didn't you make that point last week, right? So are we going to...
She released her own album 2 years ago.
Okay. All right.
And Chris DeGarmo wrote The Prophecy and The Warning, and a song about a UFO landing called New Regal, New EA Regal. And he's just a genius. I know we're stuck in rock and roll history, and I think we should discredit some of these people like Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry, who have lived sordid lives, and Elvis Presley and Lisa Marie Presley, who really weren't that talented,
Okay, wait, dude. I know that you sound like a real acolyte of Queensryche, and I thought that was a good mention last week when you asked me about Queensryche and Chris DeGarmo and the fact that he was a pilot and whatever. I think that's totally cool. But is that the only thing you want to talk about? Is Queensryche?
I can talk about everything on the show. I mean, the thing about Elvis, he was good, but he met Priscilla when she was 12, and it was not a good situation. And a lot of
let's go with that. But we know that you say Elvis was good. You know he was better than Chris DeGarmo of Queensryche.
I'm not going to say that. I mean, he was a vocalist.
I will say that. So we'll have to agree to disagree on Elvis just being good. Elvis, I'm not saying he was a perfect guy, and I don't know anything about the personal life of Chris DeGarmo and whether it would stand up to the kind of scrutiny that Elvis's did. And I don't agree with how Elvis conducted himself with regard to women. I'm not suggesting that you're wrong there, but if it's going to be a weekly call about the lead singer of Queensryche, I just think we got to find a different subject, okay? So let's, I'll give you a week to think about that. I'm sure you'll call back sometime along the way, but I would strongly encourage you find a new vein to explore. Joe is in Rochester, New York on Coast to Coast AM. Joe?
Yes, Ian.
Hey.
Hey, bud. How you doing? Thanks for taking the call.
Sure.
Okay, I got a couple questions. So throughout the week, I write down a couple questions there.
That's good.
I know they're going to be on there.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump a little bit across what your guest was talking about earlier, and then a religious question. So let me start with the religious one. So
okay,
I was watching this program during Christmas about Christ and his relationship with Mary Magdalene.
Okay.
Do you think there's a surviving lineage between them at all?
So this is the royal bloodline theory, the divine right of kings, that the offspring of Jesus and Mary eventually, right? Is this where you're going with that?
Absolutely, yes.
No, I don't happen to believe that. Now, here's what I do believe, and I don't. Let's be very clear. Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. Period. There is nothing in the Bible that says she was a prostitute.
100%.
So she's often associated with a woman who was a prostitute, but that woman's never given a name. So we've got that. I also want to make the point that it was uncommon. It would have been an absolute aberration for a rabbi, and Jesus was a rabbi. We know that because the disciples called him that, and he was recognized as being a rabbi. It would have been completely out of the norm for him to be a rabbi and not be married.
Right.
So that part is unusual. There is nothing that's ever said specifically that it was Mary, but she is the one that is the most devoted. She is the one that appears first at every one of these events. She is the one who seems to mourn like a wife. And there's a lot of people who would say that any sort of association between the two of them has been obliterated for history.
I would have to agree with that. I was hoping you would say that.
Yeah, but whether does that mean they go off in Spain or France and they have children and they go on to become kings and queens? I do not think that's. I understand the theory, but there's nothing to support it other than legacy and people who throw things together.
Okay, just a couple more real quick. Ark of the Covenant, most fascinating story probably on Earth.
Absolutely, I agree.
Do you think it's in Somalia, in that temple, or in that area in Africa?
In Ethiopia?
In Ethiopia, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, yes, I think it is. I think it looks perhaps today, if there is any physical remnant of it, it looks nothing like what we imagined, although we have a very clear description of it. And I think that a part of it could easily still be either in a museum or still being treated as a relic somewhere in some obscure monastery. Yes, that's entirely possible.
Okay, then the only other question I had is, do you think, not do you think, but do you know if MUFON pushes back on Lou Alessandro's theories and research, or do they collaborate with each other? No idea.
No idea.
Okay, and then the last one I had is, I got you, but is, so if 90 to 95% of the stuff that is being seen can be, can be ruled out, is
right?
military dark program.
Right.
Okay, so my question is, if it was U.S. military or dark program or even our adversaries, why wouldn't we use it for a deterrent, or if it was our adversaries to provoke, as provocation? You know what I mean? Like in China and Southeast Asia, why wouldn't they say, knowing that we might back up Taiwan, or for them to say, listen, this is what we have and this is what we'll use. If I always thought that if you got the big stick, show it. You know what I mean?
No, I think this is a perfect response to the idea that this is terrestrial technology from a hostile government, that we are experiencing, and that's why the Pentagon, in its most recent this week release of the DoD preliminary assessment, gives such a high figure of 171 cases that they can't explain. They don't give any details as to which ones of those they can't explain. We need to know that. So before we can go any further in our conjecture, we need to know what kind of things can't they determine. What's their criteria for? We don't know what that is. When we know that, I think that we'll be better off. Is this a drone technology? Many of these were dismissed as drones. Well, drones. It's different from your kid, the middle school kid down the street who got a drone for Christmas, right? And some sort of drone that's being operated by another government. And so that may be what we're not willing to talk about yet.
Right. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So, but they're not. So until we have more specifics, we're left just kind of a wondering. But I always enjoy your calls, so keep writing down those questions. It was really good. I wish more people did that. They'd be as succinct on the air as you are. East of the Rockies, Mark is in Buffalo on Coast to Coast AM. Mark.
Hi, Ian. I really enjoy when you're on.
Oh, thank you. And all of our hearts are still with Buffalo, New York. And I mean, I've been pulling for your Bills for a while, but boy, that DeMar Hamlin story just sticks with you. I'm so happy that he's home, and it looks like he's going to make a full recovery. Don't know if he's ever going to play again.
I'm listening to you on the mighty WBEN 9:30 a.m. News Talk Radio Buffalo. They
Excellent.
did a fantastic job keeping people informed during this terrible blizzard of 5 feet of snow.
Yeah.
I was out of power for 72 hours.
Oh, my God. That's nuts, too. I forgot about that. Yeah, you guys have had a lot hitting on you. Yeah, and not just one wave, but you had a couple, right?
Yeah, that was the third storm so far. I also wanted to say that your call screener is quite a shining star. What a friendly person she is.
Oh, she's got her own fan base. I think there are websites devoted to Gina. I'm pretty sure. And
I'll be the newest member.
Yeah, if you go online and look, I'm sure there's chat rooms that are dedicated to Gina. So, yeah.
I've got a really scary Bigfoot story that's for real, and I'll endeavor to be brief.
No, from that part of New York.
No, this was in suburban Philadelphia, in a little town I lived in called Audubon, which is 25 miles northwest of Philadelphia. And I was farther out in a town called Oaks, and I was at a gathering of friends. I worked at the country club, and 2 o'clock rolled around, and I could not find a ride home. So I played soccer. This was my senior year in high school, so I decided to run home. And this was 4 o'clock on December 29th, 1980.
Wow.
And I ran, and there was a gray, milky sky. There was snow on the ground. I went up between 2 roads in my development called Provincetown, between Meadowlark and Mockingbird, and there's a path called the Green Path. To my left is a fence. It's 4 feet high. I'm 20 feet away. There's a towering figure with brown hair, silver tips on the hair, glowing red eyes, 8 feet tall.
I'm with you.
I screamed.
I bet.
I ran. I cursed. I went and ran to the guy. I saw the illumination of his eyes through the lights from the outside buildings. I ran 100 yards, knocked on this guy's door, and he goes, "What do you want?" I said, "Call the cops, man." He goes, "Wait a minute. What do you want?" And I said, "You don't understand me. Call the cops now." Cops pick me up. Cop goes, "Well, why am I here?" And I said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. And they drove me home, and the next day, I was friends with the center of the football team. We found the footprints. They were 18 inches long.
Wow. You know, and that's interesting.
The smell was indescribable. It smelled like feces, deer,
matted
skunk,
hair,
urine. Right. It was just nasty, and it grunted when it saw me. Went, and I was like, "Oh, I'm out of here. I'm gone."
You know what? First of all, you tell that story really well. So kudos to you. Most people don't tell their stories. That was not only was it clear with a beginning, a middle, and an end. I loved your attention to detail. You got to write that down. That was really good, and you really put me in that place. So I'm up against the top of the hour clock, but that reminds me that there are other Appalachian, that Appalachian region is sort of understated when it comes to its participation in this lore and or reality. In your case, reality. So, is it possible? Well, we got another hour of open lines. We'll see whether anybody else chimes in on that, too. In Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, no less, on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Week in rock and roll. We mentioned Jeff Beck earlier, then Lisa Marie Presley, Robbie Bachman, the drummer for Bachman Turner Overdrive. And then I heard from Marty, who tells me that, and I don't know this, but this is what Marty said, and I believe him, Robbie Knievel, the son of Evel Knievel, who has a museum not too far from me down the road here in Kansas. The Evel Knievel Museum is in Topeka. Anyway, he passed away in Reno at the age of 60 from cancer. Robbie Knievel did. So, and then there's others, too. There's just all names have been popping up, little things. Bad week for celebrities. It's kind of like the end of every semester just before I give a final. Is the great grandparent massacre that happens every semester, where grandparents drop dead, seemingly out of nowhere, on the day that the final is supposed to be taken. And I get a note saying, I can't come to the final, or I need a couple of days extension because my grandmother or grandfather died. And it is so consistent that it's always on that day of the finals that grandparents, they just drop like flies. If I were a grandparent of somebody who was in college, I'd be very worried. I'd call them and say, "What days are your finals?" And I would go right away to a hospital and just be there right in the emergency room. Just camp out in the emergency room just in case something bad happens, because it's like the final plague in. With the children of Israel, where God killed the firstborn male of every animal. And there was great wailing and gnashing of teeth. And so it's like that. But it's always on finals day, and it's always a grandparent. It's very sad. Oh, but the good news is, miraculously, biblically, they somehow resurrect themselves for the next finals, where they might actually die again. All right, so open lines, your opportunity to jump in with wherever you want to take the show, and who knows where that will go in our last 60 minutes. On Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. JC308 just tweeted me and asked me about whether it's true that Jeff Beck's fingers were insured for $7 million. Actually, to be more specific, his fingers and his thumbs were insured for $7 million. I read that in an obit earlier this week, too. I believe that's true. I don't, first of all, like, those Lloyd's of London stories are often just publicity pieces for Lloyd's of London. They're happy to insure something like that. Emily's in Charlotte, North Carolina, on Coast to Coast. Open lines. Emily?
Hi, Ian. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure. Where are you going to take us?
I was going to ask you, I didn't get through in time to talk to Bill, but I had a question about screen memories. Are you familiar with those?
Tell me more about that.
I heard about them first on Coast to Coast, and that's kind of where I was putting the pieces together for what happened to me when I was at the beach stargazing on vacation. My husband wouldn't come out that night. Usually we would watch stars together. And so something happened to me, and I couldn't tell you what happened to me exactly. But after listening to the Navajo police officers were on the coast one night,
yeah,
I think, I can't remember the guy's name, but I think maybe Robert or something, he wrote a book, and he was giving all kinds of examples, and he gave an example of this girl who was followed in her car by a light, and she saw this huge rabbit when she got home. She even called her boyfriend to say, if I don't make it back, something bad happened to me. Well, I had a similar thing, not the lights, but I saw something that night on the deck, and there's no way in nature it could be that big. And so I figured out from that episode I had a screen memory. My heart started racing. I started having intense fear. Exactly what happened to me that night after I came back in. I fell apart. It was freezing cold. I was shaking. I mean, my husband, I think, was downstairs watching TV and didn't even know what was happening. I put on as many clothes as I could. You don't have that much when you're on vacation at the beach, and it wasn't even that cold. It was in October. So anyway, I figured out I had these screen memories. And so I was thinking, when Bill was on, where do the screen memories come from? Are they kind of, for lack of a better word, implanted in you by whoever's causing the thing to happen, or is it yourself doing it because you need to protect yourself from what happened?
Well, I mean, doesn't that just sound like classic PTSD?
Yeah, totally PTSD. I was later treated for that, and some
Did it help?
alternative medicine. It did help, but I mean, just not talking about it. Anytime I talk about it, which is extremely rare, because who am I going to talk about it with?
Right.
I feel shaky right now, and I feel I can feel it all over again. I mean, I came in, I cried my eyes out. I'm freezing. I'm like, I don't know what happened, and
but that's still PTSD. I mean, it doesn't. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Your brain, your sense of well-being, your psyche has gotten slightly bent as a result of that experience. And so therapy can only go so far. Some people have turned to psychedelics for PTSD, and they said that's the most effective therapy.
I'm an empath, so that would probably way send me over the edge of something.
I don't know. I'm not saying it for sure, but people who have had experiences in Vietnam, people who they were affected for years watching a friend blow apart, sitting next to them, just suddenly blow apart, and they had the same kind of associated with the sound of whistles. Or bangs, or even just the smell of a forest or whatever. And the only way they could reroute kind of the wiring in their brain on that was through different uses of psychedelics. I'm not saying that's what you have to do, but that is how extreme it can be, that this imprinting has changed the way that you interface with the world. So
it kind of makes me a little fearful to stargaze by myself, I will tell you that.
There you go. I mean, even that. But that just might be enough. And I would say that let's use Occam's razor there, that the simplest explanation is the most likely, that you are somebody that still suffering from that. You might still need some ongoing help, and that you need to keep isolating the times when you get something triggered like that, because that's real. I mean, I say it's real in the sense of whatever it is. If you're having that kind of a reaction, I had that reaction in the dentist chair, and I'm not joking. I had a very horrible. I'm a very dental phobic person.
Right, me too. Yeah, I get that.
And when I get into a dentist chair, I have the little rituals I have to do, these little weird things. And when I do them, I'm fine. And I get better every time. I can last longer. I can do other things that I didn't have to do before. But so it's all a process, Emily. Thanks for jumping in, though. The story, maybe you've inspired other people, too, to take another look at their reactions to things that happen by themselves. Gary is in Pennsylvania on Coast to Coast AM. Gary?
Yeah, hi, Ian. Thank you for taking my call. You have Jeff Beck as you're playing all his music, my favorite all-time song of his was Beck's Bolero. That's the one where he was on lead, Jimmy Page was on rhythm, John Paul Jones was on bass,
Nicky Hopkins on piano,
and Keith Moon on the drums.
Keith Moon on drums, I know.
A super group. Wow, what a super group.
But that was kind of what he was famous for, because he did the same thing with a couple other constellations of some pretty major stars. It is already, I believe that's, hold on a second. Hey, Dan, are we going into the bottom of the hour break with Beck's Bolero? Oh, we already played it once earlier, so sorry about that.
I must have missed it. Missed it.
Yeah.
I didn't listen. But anyway, and another thing, what was I going to tell you? You were talking to somebody a few weeks ago or whatever. I was like half asleep when I heard you talking.
Me too.
But you were talking about something. Some guy was saying something. You said evidence of absence isn't absence of evidence.
Right.
And I said to myself, "Wow, this guy even knows logic." You know.
Well, yeah. That you use that to avoid needless conversations, because people love to drag you into stuff unless you can really isolate exactly what they're talking about. There's a lot of times that people say that. Yep.
And one last thing. The last time I talked to you, I was rambling on, and you wanted to make a comment, and then I listened to the whole show, and I realized you made a comment at the bottom of the hour. And I said to myself, "Man, I must have been really running my mouth." So we were talking about Fiona Apple or something. So I owe you an apology for that.
Oh no, don't.
No, you were talking about the video criminal. And then you said that you went to high school with the guy. I was like, wow. I said,
yeah. Yeah, he's a great director.
She has a great song called Pentagon now.
I love Fiona Apple, yeah. And that criminal video is pretty awesome.
I think that fits the both kids.
Well, see, and here we go. And I don't know if suddenly you're breaking up, Gary, and I have nothing to do with that, and you don't have anything to do with that. So sometimes that's just the vagaries of what happens when we're doing connections through Los Angeles. So sorry about that, but you kind of disappeared on me. But whatever it was that I did before, if I did it wrong, I'm sorry. If I did it right, yay me. International call. Let's see. Somebody was hanging on, I thought, on the internet. No, let's go first-time caller line. Kyle is in Medford on Coast to Coast AM. Kyle?
Yes, sir. Medford, Oregon. Thanks. Super
know it well.
Excited. Long-time listener to Coast to Coast, and glad to have you on, and thank you for having me on. I wanted to, I tried to call earlier, but I understand there's lots of people calling. For your guest earlier,
right?
And I wanted to share my experience in '97 with Phoenix Lights.
Oh, cool! You were in Phoenix? Were you living there?
I'm originally from Phoenix. I was born there, St. Joseph's Children's Hospital, and my parents moved up to Southern Oregon when I was younger. So Phoenix is a great place to be from.
Yeah.
But anywho, when I was younger, we would travel back there to visit family. I still have a lot of family there. And there's always, there's like a recurring nightmare that a lot of people have, falling downstairs or whatever it may be.
Sure. Speaking in front of crowds naked.
Right. So mine is not a nightmare, but it's just a recurring memory. And I remember it vividly as I would any other childhood memory. And I remember the layout of the home perfectly. My aunt's house in Ahwatukee.
Yeah.
And
I used to go to the theater in Ahwatukee when I lived there. They had a big, like 13-screen Metroplex there in Ahwatukee.
Well, that was probably before my time. But,
yeah, or after your time, I promise you. Yeah.
But anywho, it's so very, very vivid that a pool in the backyard, and I remember I'm 37 years old. I think I was like 10, 11 at the time. And I went downstairs to grab a glass of water, and I don't remember lights, but I do remember just standing and looking out the glass door, or the sliding glass door, and there is a gray just standing there next to the pool. And that's one thing. It's kind of like looking into a light bulb.
Yeah.
It's seared into your memory for a short time, but this is lifetime.
How old were you then, do you think?
About 10, 11.
Okay.
And I don't remember anything other than that, other than just this moment of calm, pause, and seeing this being standing next to the pool, just staring back at me.
Yeah.
And that's all I remember. And it was, like I said, it was complete calm, no turmoil, anything like that, but it was just, and I've been hesitant to tell that to many people. My best friend's brother of mine, my buddy Nick, was like, "Man, you got to share your story." So
I'm glad you did. It's interesting when you talk about it because the Phoenix, there was two different incidences, right, which we call the Phoenix Lights. There were actually a couple of different things that kind of get conflated together. And that area, again, is it the mountains nearby? Is it the darkness once you get outside of the city by a half hour or so? Ahwatukee, maybe back then in particular, would have been someplace where the skies were darker. They probably aren't now because it's densely populated. But but you get outside of the exurbs, and you have a very black sky. So there are a lot of people I know who have reported things. Sedona, Arizona, is one of the hot spots. Flagstaff is another place. So you're in company with other Arizonans. I think there is a display or a museum tour or something that's going on in Phoenix or outside of Phoenix right now on Phoenix Lights too. So I'm glad you shared it. I hope that again, that inspires other people. Just be honest about their experience. You don't know what it was. You know what you saw, and you know how you're processing it. And this all started because the Department of Defense put out another report saying 171 of these UAP sightings cannot be accounted for, but they won't tell us what those sightings are really like. They don't give us any details. They just promise us that within a couple of years they'll release a report. But this is the addendum to the preliminary assessment. So enough of that already. Why don't you just give us the assessment? You got enough people on the payroll in the Pentagon. I think you can work this out. Dan is on a wild card line in Indiana on Coast to Coast in the time we have before the bottom of the hour. Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the number 13. You was talking about the Templar, and I've heard that on the History Channel about the Knights Templar.
I don't know whether that's true, but it's one of those things.
I was going to take it back a little further. There's actually a story in Greek mythology about the 13th sign, and there used to be 13 signs. They're based basically on the lunar month,
right?
Or the lunar cycle. And if you 13 times 28 is 364 right there. So But anyway, the story of the Minotaur and the Labyrinth is the story of the 13th sign, and it was considered unlucky, so they did away with it. But the sign was represented by the spider because they said people born under this sign sometimes had severe depression.
Oh, interesting.
Something trapped in a web waiting to die. And if you look at the story, the twin brothers, the first one went to fight the Minotaur to win the king's daughter's hand in marriage, and he got killed. And the second one come back, and she saw him, and she told her handmaid, "Didn't this young man come earlier?" And so the handmaids went over to him and brought him over to the princess, and she asked him, and he said, "No, that was my brother. Yes, he did die, and I'm here to avenge his death." And so anyway, she felt sorry for him and gave him the little knife and the spool of thread or whatever to trace her way back out. But anyway, if you look at the name Minotaur, because the sign supposedly goes in between Gemini and Taurus, the Minotaur was half man, half bull. Taurus is a bull. Gemini is represented by twin, which are men.
That's interesting, yeah.
If you take the name and take GE off of Gemini, you have Mina, and then the first four letters of Taurus is Tor. So you have Minotaur. And when I read this, it just made so much sense. I've probably read this 25 or 30 years ago.
You know what? That makes a ton of sense. I like it. And it kind of reminds me, thank you so much, when you mentioned the sign of the spider, I'm reminded of that Albert King classic, Born Under a Bad Sign, right? Born Under a Bad Sign, been down since I began to crawl. If it wasn't for bad luck, I wouldn't have any luck at all. I wonder if that's what he was getting at, the sign of the spider. The spider. All right, last half hour, we'll get to your questions, your comments. It's open lines. Where are you going to take us next on Coast to Coast AM? This is Ian Punnett. It's sad about Jeff Beck, sad about a lot of people who have passed on in pop music this week. But Princess Diana is one of those people who people will be talking about forever and ever and ever. She is immortal. She was probably the most famous person on the planet for a good time. And I was surprised when I heard her son talking about her on 60 Minutes last week, where he said he really is not sure. Harry's not sure that she wasn't murdered. And for a long time was 100% convinced that she was. He's read the reports. He doesn't buy them. So I want to revisit that. We're trying to find new scholarship on that. Maybe a show we get back to later on. But until then, tomorrow night, Glynis McCants is going to join us. She does the numerology on the royal family. And all of her predictions so far have turned out to be true. She did it for the Daily Mail. So they're in print. It's not just like something she said to somebody, at a bar or something. This is like the real deal. So we'll talk to her in the first hour on Saturday night, and then we'll talk about billionaires who want to live forever, how they might do that, and the ethics of that. Bart Costco will join us, Professor Dr. Bart Costco, for the main part of the show on Saturday night. In the meantime, you're the main part of the show from now on. For the rest of this hour, it's open lines, and the time that we have, it's yours on Coast to Coast AM. And for George Norrie, this is Ian Punnett. Been a lovely night on Twitter, too. Lots of activity. So at Deacon Punnett, if you want to keep in touch until I'm back on again sometime. Tomorrow night on Coast to Coast. Let's go back to open lines where Jim has been hanging on the longest. He's in Delaware on a wild card line. Jim?
Hey, Ian Punnett.
How are you?
People, I have no time for these people that think Jesus was a mere man and married Mary Magdalene. They don't understand at all what Jesus' mission on earth was for. And besides, Revelation, Jesus marries the church. The bride of Christ is the church. It'll include Mary Magdalene, and I agree with you. Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. And the thing is, for these people, another thing, there's Christians that think the rapture is going to happen any day now. And Apostle Paul gives the timing of the rapture in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 52. It says, in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead in Christ will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. So it's at the last trumpet, and I don't even know if the first trumpet went off yet. So we're going to be here when the Antichrist is here, and we're going to be persecuted for calling him the Antichrist, while the world believes in him as the Messiah.
Okay. Well, I don't think those predictions hold anymore. I don't think this is an unfulfilled prediction. So, I appreciate your perspective on that, but I have a very different scholarly approach to Revelation. And I think it spoke to a place and a time. But maybe if you dug a little deeper on the backstory of Revelation, you might be open to a broader conversation about what was being said. But I appreciate your passion, and I hope you feel better for having gotten that off your chest. And Michael's in San Antonio, Texas on Coast to Coast AM. Michael?
Hi, good morning. Before I get to why I called, and I'll tie it into why I'm calling, I love your bit on the grandfather.
The great grandparent massacre.
You missed your calling. You should go on comedy tour, my man.
Yeah, thank you.
I laughed at that. It was so funny. And tying it in, look, I'm a baby boomer, and I know death is part of dying. But when it happens to one, and it happens to every generation, people around you, your same age, start dying. It really hits home.
Yeah.
But two questions: Jeff Beck and musicians in general. Where do you rank Jeff Beck? I mean, I can find probably 5 better. Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton. Well, where do you rank him? Top 5?
Number one.
Number 1. Wow.
Better than Hendrix. And let me tell you why. Because Beck, if not number 1, number 2, I don't know who would be if we could debate number 1. But he played in so many different forms over the years. So he purposely chose to play, you get up and do solo guitar work on opera. He did Nessun Dorma, which is beautiful. His version is amazing. He would do Beck's Bolero. He would do blues. He would do all sorts of jazz. He was a fusionist, way ahead of his time. So in terms of just being a pure guitar, note-for-note guitar player, I don't think Hendrix had a style, and Hendrix was cool, but he didn't have the longevity, and he didn't have new chops. Like Beck was always pushing himself for new chops. Clapton was great. I mean, there's no doubt, but I don't know. Who would you rank higher?
Well, like I said, Jimi Hendrix off the top of my head, Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton. But that's not to disparage. I love Jack Beck.
It's great, but I mean, you got to give a reason. So here's my, and I'm not debating this with you, but it's fair opinion. I'm not, but there's something about the way, so if we look at it as an instrumentalist as opposed to a popular person, I mean, certainly Beck would not be the first person that most people would mention. But that's one of the reasons why I like his work so much. So,
but you like Stevie Ray, right?
Stevie Ray. I would put Stevie Ray in the top 5. Stevie Ray Vaughan, hands down. Yeah.
Right. Last question. I mean, is it true that youngsters nowadays, and you're around them more often, don't even know who Jeff Beck was or the old line, Paul McCartney was in a group before the Wings?
Yeah, that's kind of an exaggerated joke. But I would say I don't think they know what Wings are, which is kind of funny. And I think that's really the subject. There was a time when Gen Xers didn't maybe know about the Beatles. They knew about Wings. That's different. Gen Z is very into music. I see a lot of Beatles T-shirts around campus, and I think that what you have with millennials and with Gen Z are people or kids who grew up listening to their parents' music, and so their parents were playing Beatles albums, and so I think that's what I keep hearing. I'll ask somebody sometimes. They'll say, "Well, yeah, I dig your Abbey Road T-shirt. Oh, I'm a big fan. I listen to them all the time." Blah, blah, blah. My dad always played Beatles, and so yeah, I think that's not a problem. I think the Wings joke was true. Sadly, for a while. I don't think it's true anymore. But they don't know who Jeff Beck probably is like a very obscure conversation for most Gen Z people. They were like, whatever. They don't really probably know who we're talking about. But that's okay. That makes him even cooler for me. Michael is in San Antonio on Coast to Coast AM. Michael? Oh, that was Michael. I'm so sorry. I blew that. Melissa is in Hilton Head in South Carolina on Coast to Coast. Melissa?
Hi.
Hi.
I called and tried to call earlier.
Sure.
Because this is my Jeff Beck wake. You're the only person I know who knows who Jeff Beck is, and I'm your grandmother. I'm ancient. And so I know the Yardbirds and the Animals and the Rascals and the Blobs, the Spencer Davis groups and all of those British groups. And I'm old, but I loved Jeff Beck, and I called you during one of your Precious shows. I called every time you're on with the studio bands, or what are those bands called that back up everybody who's popular?
We were talking about a couple of different bands, but in particular the band from Los Angeles. That was right. That was most common.
Bands or whatever they're called, and I just melt. I melt when you have them on. So I've called you every time. But what I'm telling you about Jeff Beck, he did Nessun Dorma.
Yeah, beautiful.
Live from the Crossroads. But please let your listeners pull up this video, Live from the Crossroads, and I have to get the date correct because I can't see it now because I have my multiple glasses on. And it was with an orchestra. People don't get who Jeff Beck is. And he also did Train to Jordan or People Get Ready.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a video.
With him, with Rod Stewart, doing People Get Ready.
Yeah. That was a Vivo old ancient video. It's adorable. Right. It's so heart-melting. But he also was live on stage, and Rod Stewart came on. And I have all the dates of these videos for your precious listeners. Because people don't know who Glenn Beck or Jeff Beck was. People don't know.
They should, and I appreciate that. And all I can do is do my part. When somebody like that, I kind of put my passion in the bumpers where I can on times like that. And it just so happened that I was going to be on this week, so thank you. And what she's referring to, if you don't know Nessun Dorma, it's the famous aria from Turandot. It's often pronounced differently, but apparently Puccini's granddaughter, I believe it was, said that that's how he pronounced it, Turandot, and that it's one of the best known arias, certainly for tenors in the world. It's a beautiful song, and there's two great versions of that. Well, there's the classic Pavarotti, but the one that, if you haven't heard it yet, is Aretha Franklin singing Nessun Dorma, which is gorgeous. And then Jeff Beck, who plays it. And he talks about, there's a video where he talks about having played it. And Nessun Dorma means let no one sleep. And it comes at it ends with the first half of the of Turandot, and it is so captivating. Like, people are holding their breath. Anytime you go see that opera, you'll just see the whole crowd be like, okay, here it is. Can the tenor pull it off? And if the tenor can sing Nessun Dorma, they've got a job for life, because it's not an easy song to sing, and it requires just expertise. And that's what I think everybody who brings something to that song must have, no matter what their instrument, a guitar or their vocal cords. Apache is in Rocky Mountains on Coast to Coast AM. Apache?
Ian, I have to give you credit. Your shows are they go by so much quicker than all the other hosts on Coast to Coast. And for me, that's a pleasure. And I really want to thank you also for remembering Jeff Beck. And he was just such an original. I mean, I don't know if it contributes to his style. When he first learned how to play the guitar, he built a guitar out of a cigar box.
Right.
And I don't know if they were always in tune, but his right hand technique, his hand techniques, you mentioned them being insured. There's nobody can duplicate that sound. I mean, it was just so unique.
And how he would move. How he would move is he would often end up playing notes with his pinky for some reason, and he would drop down and pick up these pinky notes, and that's what surprised a lot of guitar players, was just the dexterity he had. So I'm glad you liked that. Thank you.
Right, and the classical, it was not necessarily a classical approach, but classical musicians or guitarists don't use picks either. So, I mean, but he was just so original, and I just want to thank you, because all the other news channels I turned on, I expected to see something about it, and it was just crickets. So But I really appreciate you bringing that up, and I'll leave some time for another caller. But I just really appreciate your shows, Ian, and thank you very much for your knowledge in religion and just everything you bring up. It just goes by so quickly.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And Chris is in Austin, Texas, on Coast to Coast AM on a wild card line. Chris?
Yeah, man, I think your show is cool as sliced bread. But anyway, I got a good story about Jeff Beck. I have an air conditioning company in Austin, and I got called to his house, and he was writing a song at the time. This was in 2010. And so the complaint was that the air was too loud coming out of his event. And, I asked him, I said, well, what's the name of your song? And he said, I Put a Spell on You. That's the song he was writing at the time. And that was awesome. But anyway, so I told him, I said, well, I got an idea. I took off and I came back and I put these dampers. One had a thermostat in each room, so whenever you go in that room, you could just turn it off and it would shut that vent. But the rest of it would go all over the house, and it impressed him so much. He gave me backseat passes to the concert in Seattle, Washington, which I'd never been to.
Oh, cool.
And it was like, it was so awesome. And
I'm so jealous.
I met a girl there and married her, and I got married after the concert.
Oh, not that same night.
No.
Okay. Yeah, because, I mean...
But that's so cool, man.
That is a great story. I appreciate you. Let me get one more person in before we run out of time, but thank you, Chris. That was great. Ross is in Michigan on Coast to Coast. Ross?
Hi, Ian. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, we got time.
So, we're going to stay with Jeff Beck. I heard a story, and I want to know if you heard a story of Jeff Beck in the background playing for Jimi Hendrix at a concert. They somehow bring Jeff Beck in because,
not surprising,
for lack of better words, that Jimmy was stoned for a couple of days and he couldn't play. And they put him on the stage, and they had Jeff Beck in the background, so the story goes, playing for him while him and his bandmates are on the stage doing the concert.
Well, that
I was wondering if you had ever heard anything.
I've never heard that, but it sounds apocryphal. But I'll tell you what, I have a couple of resources. So in the first hour tomorrow night, I'll try to make a note of following up on that, because that sounds right, and I would think that Chaz, Chaz Chandler would have been friendly because the animals and the Yardbirds came up together about that time, so that might have been the guy that he would turn to, and he would say, "Hey, I need a little help here in case my star can't make it," Okay, well, cool. Great way to end on a hanging curve. Coming up tomorrow night on Coast to Coast AM, then Glennis McCants in the first hour, and we'll talk about immortality for billionaires. Maybe you too, coming up tomorrow night in the main part of the show. Coast to Coast, always fun. And in the meantime, no matter what you believe, I strongly endorse everybody has a right to believe differently. I appreciate people calling up and giving me the opportunity to comment on that. I hope we never go too far. Deus te amat, and I do too.